All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Mark Smith. Mark, welcome. So awesome to have you.
A delight to be here, Kevin. Let's give your listeners something to think about when it comes to million-dollar
Absolutely.
relationships,
Absolutely.
something to act on,
Yeah.
and maybe a surprise or two about million-dollar relationships. I can't wait to have this conversation.
I've been looking forward to this too, and I want to give Mario a shout out because he's the one who introduced you and I, and of course, then in me in doing my just following up, I found out that you were also connected with another friend of mine, Jason. I call him Jason. A lot of other people call him Wally Waldron, and I just think that is absolutely awesome because Jason slash Wally and I we go back 19 years. I mean, he has been one of those long standing relationships in my life, and it's very interesting having hosted this podcast now for a year and a half. One of the things that I have long believed is that as entrepreneurs, our most valuable asset is the relationships that we have. Everything else stems from that. And the more I do this podcast, the more conversations I have, the more I am just not only convinced of that, but the more evidence I see of that over and over and over. And so, with that, Mark, I'd like to just turn over to you a little bit so that we can set a little bit of context so you can share a little bit about what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do. And we'll start there, Mark.
All right. Before we do that, I want to actually talk about Mario and Wally for just a moment. I want to give them a
Okay.
little bigger shout out. So, listener, Mario Lanzarotti is somebody who I've known for several years and has become a dear friend and an extraordinary business consultant. And he was preparing for a TEDx talk uh, back in November of last year. And I said, "Would you like a little coaching?" And he said, "Sure." And the reason why I can offer that is because I've been a professional speaker for 3 decades and have delivered over 2,000 speeches in 54 countries. So I know a little bit about delivering speeches. And
Yeah.
yes, I was paid to deliver those speeches. They were not freebies. I made a living doing that. And so I was able to give him some coaching. And since then, he has had over 1.1
Oh,
million views
yes.
on
Yeah.
his TEDx talk on about self doubt. And so if Mario has connected me with a lot of people who I've coached through other TEDx talks. And so that was a valuable relationship just there because I served him in improving his talk, and he declares I'm one of the reasons why his talk is going so well. It's not that I was polishing a diamond. So so Mario, thank you for that $1 million relationship. Well, on its way to $1 million relationship. And Wally Waldron is just an extraordinary man who has self-published books on how to create websites that create um, success in business. And Wally had a relationship with one of the people that I want to talk about on our show today, Jay
Okay.
Conrad Levinson. And so there is a spider of connections here through this network. And what that illustrates is that sometimes a connection or a relationship isn't necessarily a million on its own, but it spiders out to well
Yeah.
over a million.
Yeah.
And that's why every relationship is to me is valuable and quite frankly in some ways sacred.
Yeah.
And I don't take my relationships lightly, and I have a lot of love for the people that I have relationships with. And I think that's part of how we create $1 million relationships. You don't get them just because of your capacity. You
That's
get
right.
them because of your character.
Yeah. 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 Amen.
So with that as
Amen.
an intro, I've been trained as an electrical engineer who's done Thank you. I've been trained as an electrical engineer who's done no engineering. I was hired by Hewlett Packard out of school, and I was asked to help them introduce to the marketplace disruptive technology. Now, disruptive technology is that technology that once you begin using it, you don't go back to the old school, and this is probably the best example of disruptive technology is the smartphone. Um, I haven't had a landline for 7 years, maybe even longer. And so that's a disruptive technology. And of course, along the way, you have to create relationships very rapidly because you have to introduce this to people when they don't even want it. They don't even have any idea that it's going to be valuable. But once they have that idea in mind, then they can be very successful with it. So I have, for the past 40 years, have been helping technology companies bring disruptive technology to market. Along the way, I've written a lot of books, which you're seeing on screen as book number 16 and number 17.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and in the next year or so, I'll write a couple more books in the Nimble series. So the people that I serve are those that are out to serve a lot of people by changing their lives, primarily with technology.
Okay.
And so I've been very fortunate to do that with IBM and Oracle and Microsoft and NetApp and other technology companies to bring better compute, faster service, lower costs to the world, which quite frankly was, I think, a lot more interesting than designing circuitry. That's okay too, but I've really enjoyed it. And along the way, I've been to a lot of countries, as I shared earlier. So I've lived a dream life because of the relationships that I've created through the ability to help people bring this technology to market.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. You know, I am curious because you have done a lot of speaking. And I remember, when I did the interview with Mario and he shared his TEDx talk with me. And I saw that it had, I think it was like 1,030,000 some views on that video. I'm just like, wow, here. In fact, I was so impressed. I ended up making a Facebook post talking about like, here's somebody whose video is making quite an impact here, and
Yeah.
so I'm just curious, how for you, how did you happen to get into doing speaking, Mark? And I just like to hear a little bit more about that too.
Well, I was thrown into it as I came out of college. I was expecting to design and analyze circuitry and do really cool, invent cool things, and maybe even get a patent with my name on it. But instead, because of my personality, the company said, no, 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 no. You can talk the talk, but you can also connect with the audience, and that's what we need more than anything else. And
Okay.
so they put me in front of audiences. And when I was a 23-year-old young man, I had a corporate credit card with a virtually unlimited credit limit. And they put me on an airplane and sent me all over Europe to introduce this technology. And so I learned how to present and speak to audiences, a lot of them in that were non-native English speaking people. So I learned very
Wow.
rapidly how to communicate simply
Mm.
and at the right level, and then to stay connected with the audience. So if they started to disconnect, I could figure out what to do to reconnect with them. And so it was something that I didn't choose. I was thrown into it.
Wow.
And about 5 years working for HP, my boss says, "Mark, what do you want to do when you grow up?" He's looking to say, do you want to lead a division? Do you want to lead a department? What do you want to do? I said, I want to be a motivational speaker. That's the last thing he expected for me to say. And what I ended up being was an informational speaker versus a motivational speaker. But I've studied great speakers, and I've had a lot of great coaching.
Yeah,
You can't do extraordinary things without getting input from extraordinary people.
that's right. That's right.
And so I sought out extraordinary people, and I put myself in their hands, and they said, okay, here is how. you can be the best you on platform,
Yeah.
because that is what really connects with an audience, is your authenticity.
Yeah.
Are you speaking from the heart? Are you there to serve them versus are you there to show off?
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had the uh, the platform arrogance beat out of me early by my coaches, so that I could actually stand and deliver without too much theatrics, which in the informational speaking that I was doing.
Yeah. You know, the right coaches will do that for us. They'll we we lose our ego really quick when we're with the right coaches, you know, and we become teachable. And yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So now that we have set some context here, I want to shift gears a little bit. So I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, Mark, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person and persons? And Mark, I'm just really excited to hear your story, your experience around this, as well as give you the opportunity to honor somebody who's had such a profound impact on your life and on your business.
Well, thank you. In 19, oh my gosh, 1991, I met Orville Ray Wilson, who had written the book Guerrilla Selling
Okay.
with J. Conrad Levinson. And J. Conrad Levinson was the man who wrote guerrilla marketing in the 80s and
Wow.
changed the way that entrepreneurs market. And his book is still the in my opinion, it's the Bible of marketing. And while there's probably 3 or 4% that are a bit out of date, if you follow his cookbook, you will be successful marketing. In fact, guerrilla marketing it's a generic term. And
Mhm.
the idea is that when you're going up against the competition who has millions to spend in advertising, and you have a few $100s, what do you do? Well, you don't do it the same way they do.
That's right.
And so Jay taught people how to compete by thinking outside the box as in a guerrilla fighter. So guerrilla isn't about an animal; it's actually about a guerrilla fighter they're going against an army with missiles and jets and smart bombs, and all you've got is some rocks and sticks and
Mhm. Mhm.
not much. So that was his metaphor. And I met Orville Ray, who had written this book with Jay, and he said, and I showed him a book that I had written on trade show selling.
Okay.
That was one of my responsibilities as a director of sales for the startup that I was working with at the time. And trade show selling is very interesting. Most people do it wrong because they see other people do it badly and mimic them. And I decided it was time to do it right. And we were very, very successful, had most of our company growth based out of trade shows. And we had a complete program that started well before the show happened, a complete program on how do you behave at the show, how do you collect leads, all that kind of thing, and then a follow-up program. And then I wrote a book called 49 Ways to Be Your Best at Trade Show Selling. Ended up selling 13,500 copies of that little book.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and Orville Ray said, "Well, this deserves being a guerrilla book. Do you think we could fluff this thing up to 75,000 words?" I said, "Oh, there's no fluff. We can take it to 75,000 words. There's lots and lots to talk about." So that got me introduced to Jay, and I had the pleasure of co-authoring that book with Jay and Orville Ray. And Jay is a magnificent man. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He passed away about 5 years ago. But his brain was able to process huge amounts of ideas in very short order and come up with innovation. And Jay worked in the advertising agency space in Chicago, worked for some of the major advertisers. And he liked to tell the story about how he was in a taxi cab, and this was in the 70s. And the taxi driver says, "So you're in the advertising game?" And Jay said, yeah, we're in the advertising game. And the taxi driver says, that stuff doesn't work. Jay says, oh, okay. Well, what toothpaste do you use? And the taxi driver said, Gleam. And Jay said, well, why do you choose Gleam? He says, because I don't always have time to brush. That was the Gleam tagline. And what he was illustrating in this story is that advertising works, but it works at a subconscious level. And most people don't even know they're being they're being influenced by advertising. And I just love that concept of using the cabbie to illustrate Jay's point that advertising does work. Now, in guerrilla marketing, advertising is the last thing you spend money on. It's not the first thing, it's the last thing. And the reason why is it's expensive. You know, he has 100 things he wants you to do before you spend $1 in advertising. And I think it's really wise because he gets the message all set up. But along the way, I had the opportunity of spending time with Jay, staying at his house, meeting his family, having Thanksgiving dinner with him one season. It was an extraordinary experience. He welcomed me with open arms and did karaoke in his living room. It was just an amazing experience. This extremely, well, he was a celebrity.
Yeah.
Just a down to earth man.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity of writing additional 2 books with Jay, Guerrilla Teleselling, which is how do you create relationships when you can't be there in person. Keep in mind, this is in the early 90s, so we didn't have the technologies we had today, but it was about remote relationships. And then Guerrilla Negotiating, which is the opposite of every other negotiating book out there. Instead of how do you get a better deal, how do you keep more margin as a salesperson? How do you counter the dirty tricks that most people play in a negotiation? And that was one of the most fun books to read and write. So that was a wonderful experience of writing a string of 3 books with Jay. And I learned a lot from Jay. Well, first of all, the cachet of writing a book with Jay in the early 90s was big. And since then, he's co-authored a lot of books with a lot of other people. Jay decided that he would partner with people of expertise and then bring his sauce.
Okay.
And which allowed him to keep his name alive. And every time somebody introduced a new guerrilla book, all the other books sold a few more. Just that uplift type of situation. But a few of the things that I learned from Jay, well, first of all, was just, the fact that I was a co-author with Jay, never mind that I wrote a book, but the fact that I co-authored with Jay gave me access to people that never would have talked to me before.
Yeah.
It was a stamp. It was a guerrilla seal of approval that I knew something special, and I had access to information that was special. And this allowed me to work with high profile companies that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, including IBM. In fact, a lot of things started off when one of the training directors from IBM sat through one of our classes, one of our guerrilla classes, and said, we need to bring this to our team. And boy, he put me in front of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And then through that, it just kind of blossomed in all of those wonderful events and really doing some extraordinary things.
Yeah.
There's a couple of characteristics about Jay I want to share.
Okay.
I think the first one is that he was a man that didn't believe in hustle. And a lot of our marketeers today are hustlers.
Yeah.
And they're out there trying to show you how successful they are with a rented Lamborghini in front of an Airbnb that they go to Vegas for 2 days and they go get the Lamborghini and they go pull up in front of an Airbnb house and they hire a couple of hookers from the casinos to come out and hang out with them. And they're trying to show the world how successful they are with these. Nothing the matter with anything I'm offering. Yeah, if that's what turns you on, go for it. But this is how they're presenting themselves, and then they spend most of their time pitching how successful and all the things that you're going to get by doing that. That was never Jay.
Yep.
I never saw any hustle in Jay ever. He was always laid back. He always had a great idea. He never was selling you his idea. He was offering, presenting his idea. And then you got to choose whether that idea was going to work for you or not.
Yeah.
And I have taken that with me to become very successful, because the companies that I've talked to abhor hustle. You don't get to VP level within HP and have a conversation about how you can help them make billions of dollars if they have even a hint of hustle in your conversation. So I think one of the critical aspects of $1 million relationships is it has to be authentic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has to be real. You can't hustle. And you better bring something to them that they hadn't seen or heard of before, that generates value. And I worked on a project with HP that turned a VP into an executive vice president who now runs HP Labs. Part of that experience gave him what he needed from a corporate standpoint because of the success that we had in the program to accelerate his career. And I think part of $1 million relationships is to help people grow, to help people get promoted. And in every case that I have where I'm working with a corporation, I'm always looking for ways to get people promoted.
Yeah. 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 You know, I just what you shared there, Mark, really hits home, because I've seen a lot of this too. This hustle that you were talking about, and you know, and even like, you know, when you know you just end up having a feeling about somebody, and you might not even be able to put your finger on exactly what it is, but you're like, you know what, this just isn't in alignment. Something's off here. And the thing is like, especially now with everything that's happened over the last few years, as a general rule, people are much more skeptical. They're much more discerning. They are much more in tune and watching for that kind of a thing. And, you know, it is in not only our best interest, but, you know, I can tell you from my own experience, you know, being able to just not, you know, my buddy Jesse has this thing that he says regularly, you know, nothing to hide and nothing to prove. And to come from that standpoint and just be able to just be us, complete with, you know, our gifts, our talents, our abilities, and our shortcomings. Because the fact is, you know, we may be absolutely brilliant in one area and completely lacking in another area, which is, you know what, that is a fact of life. We are all
count on it
that way. And when we can just accept that and be okay with that, and even joke about it, and you know, it is such a freeing experience to not have to be concerned about what somebody else thinks of us. That we and you know, when we are that way, that's when people are just attracted to us. The right people that like us for who we are, complete with our shortcomings, our faults, whatever, they just appreciate that. And we attract an amazing group of people just by being us. And I'll tell you what, it's like this weight gets lifted off our shoulders. Like, oh, I don't have to act a certain way or try to be a certain way or try to act like so and so or feel if I was more like them, then I'd be happier, then I'd be successful, whatever that is. No, we can just be us. And what a powerful and freeing experience that is. And you have definitely experienced that. So I want to ask just one follow-up question, because you've already alluded to some stuff. You alluded to these books that you co-authored with Jay and all of this. But I want to, if you look, I just want to, because I want to dig a little bit deeper into this power of these relationships. So if you look at this relationship that you and Jay had over the years, what is one thing that just comes top of mind to you where that you were able to make a really big impact, and hands down, that would have never happened if not for the relationship that you and Jay had?
Well, without a doubt, writing 3 books that were published by John Wiley and Sons with Jay's name at the top was such a powerful, compelling force for my life, because it gave me entree, as I mentioned before, into large organizations that saw that as an endorsement, not only from Jay, but also from the publisher, because Wiley is one of those, if you're doing nonfiction books and you get to be published by Wiley, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so for me, what Jay did is set me up to write a lot more books. He showed me how to work in the publishing industry. He showed me how to write manuscripts. He showed me how to work with editors. He showed me the entire process so that I knew how to publish a book.
Yeah.
And that process has served me extremely well, because I know how the publishing market works, and I know what needs to be done, how to do it, what the steps are. And it's not a mystery to me.
Yeah.
And along the way, because of those books and the relationships that those books allowed me to have, thanks to Jay, it connected me with HP, and they came to me and said, we have this brand new computer system that we're betting the farm on, but only 5% of our reseller channel has been able to sell one. Do you think you could help? And my answer was, yeah, I can help. That's what I do. Disruptive technology, bring it to market. So I created a pilot program for them, and it was wildly successful. And what I've learned is, you want to work with big companies, you have to work with them in chunks. You don't do $1 million of a company right out of the box. Mm-hmm. It's too risky. The career risk is way, 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 way too high. So you start off with a small price tagged item, relatively speaking. You prove success, and then that brings the next pilot program. Then that brings out the rollout, and then we get the worldwide rollout. And so, in this particular case, it ended up being 3 or 4 phases before this happened. But the end result is the people that went through the pilot program were very successful selling the technology, because we essentially used guerrilla selling techniques to do so, guerrilla strategies to do so. And then we rolled that out to North America and saw wild success, and we rolled it out worldwide. And the end result is that my company ended up doing 500 events for HP worldwide, and we ended up doing it for 3 different product lines.
Wow.
And then 2008 came along, and HP just had a policy of no external contractors because of the insanity of that downturn. So we got caught in a political economic downturn. Otherwise, that could have gone on for decades.
Yeah.
Because of the approach that we took. Could have. It went on for many, many years. And the end result is, we made millions and millions of dollars over the time that we did that with HP. We had 13 trainers on the road, and none of that would have ever happened without the experience that I had with Jay.
Yeah.
Without the relationship of he teaching me what I needed to know to be successful in publishing and writing, because we essentially wrote a book for every one of of the products that we did a release for.
Mhm.
So, okay, I can do that.
Yeah. Wow, what a powerful story, Mark. I mean, I mean, you know, I I've always had two goals for this podcast right from the beginning, to give people like yourself that I get the opportunity to interview, give you the opportunity to honor people who have had such a profound impact on your life and on your business. And then on the other side, for the listeners, like I said, I want to just inspire them to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And we have definitely achieved that here today. And I want to thank you so much, Mark, for your role in that. And that was such an awesome story to kind of tie this together and stuff and just really demonstrate the power and the value of the right relationships and that what can happen and what can take place, and it's game changing. And so for anybody listening to this going, man, Kevin, I really like Mark, I love the way Mark shows up, how can they find out more about you and what you're doing and all that? Do you have any resources you can share with them?
Well, better than that. If you've been listening and saying, gosh, I've got a blood spurting problem, I think this guy can help, call me. My cell phone number is 719-440-0439. So 719, it's Colorado, 440-0439. Just text me first and say, hey, I saw you on the $1 Million Relationship Show, and I'd really love to have a conversation with you. What are your free? Why would you give your cell phone number out on a podcast of me? And nobody abuses it. I've been doing this for up to LinkedIn. Mark's on LinkedIn.com, MARKSON LinkedIn.com. That'll take you right to my my site. Mark Smith, you'll never find me. Mark S.A. Smith, that's how people get a hold of me.
Uh-huh.
And but that short link will take you right to my my LinkedIn site. Just say, hey, I saw you on the podcast. Want to connect? Absolutely, we'll connect. I have over 150 articles up there, and you can always have conversations with me. I'm always glad to talk with people.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Mark, once again, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate you. Any last thing you would feel compelled to share
Likewise.
before we call it a wrap?
I think that the key thing is that relationships require feeding and watering, and you don't meet a person and do $1 million deal right out of the box. They have to get to know you and trust you. They have to get to like you and see your true value in action. And the reason why is because the risk is too high for them to be taken in by a hustler. Although the more mature people get, the much faster they are at saying, this guy's not for real. So I'll be nice, but there's no relationship that I'm going to build. Mm-hmm. So recognize that building relationships it takes time. And, if you're at the beginning of your career, build relationships now. Yeah. Because you'll grow into them. Yeah. And that snot-nosed kid that you went to high school or to kindergarten with, it becomes the mayor of a big city. And it's nice to be able to tap into those relationships when the time is right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been really fantastic, Mark. And once again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate you. And this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
And thank you for the great questions. Thank you for our platform for others to share how to create $1 million relationships.
Yeah.